It's 7:30 and we're going to get started. Welcome to the September meeting of the Johnson Space Center Astronomical Society. I'm Doug Holland, the president of the JSC AS, and this is our agenda for this evening. If you have questions or comments during our meeting, you can either enter them in as a YouTube comment if you have an account that will allow you to do that, or you can email your questions to our presenters at the email address shown at the bottom of the slide, jscaslive@gmail.com. And Trevor Quinn will be gathering up those questions and comments and providing them to our main presenter, David Haviland, and then I'll be getting the questions and comments together to ask Trevor Quinn during his part of the presentation. So first up, we're going to have my journey in taking lunar images, an update with Dr. David Haviland. Then we will have a DIY astronomy adventures in Arduino Scope with Trevor Quinn. Then we'll wrap it up with Star Party News back with David Haviland. So before we start our main talk, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Dr. David Haviland. David's motto is cells by days and stars by night. David has spent nearly 40 years in the biomedical research field in basic sciences, specifically immunology and autoimmunity, why your body attacks itself. He got his PhD from the University of California at Riverside, then went to Washington University in St. Louis, then to the University of Texas Health Science Center here in Houston, and has worked for the last 10 years at the Methodist Research Institute. He currently assists researchers in their investigation of cancer, stem cell, biomarker, and immunological studies. He's published articles, book chapters, been a reviewer for a number of scientific journals, and has participated and helped organize international workshops. His PhD has nothing, he repeats, nothing to do with astronomy. He got started in astronomy in 1998 and has always had an interest in spaceflight and the moon. In the early 2000s, he met Connie, who also has an interest in astronomy, and they eloped in Hawaii in 2004. They have helped organize and run the Houston Astronomy Day, held positions in both JSC AS and the Fort Bend Astronomy Club, co-led an eclipse tour with Paul Maley, and helped Paul with the 2018 Pluto occultation of a 12.9 magnitude star, and have both obtained the Outreach, Stellar, and Master Outreach awards offered by the Astronomical League. His astronomical interests are broad, but galaxies and nebulas are high on the list, only behind observing and photographing the moon. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. David Haviland.
David, you have a go.
All right. Thank you for the kind introduction there, Doug. I kept this slide in the presentation because we used it a couple of months ago for the virtual TSP. So it was sort of a introductory slide when we didn't have time for lengthy introductions. So yeah, this is going to be an update because it crossed my mind that the last time I gave this talk to JSCAS was actually November of 2019 when we were still meeting in person at the LPI. And then FBAC asked me to give it last January, and in the process of revising it ended up being a 2/3 complete revision since I'd actually changed my workflow and how I work these lunar images. And so then I finally relented, and Doug said, "Oh, you could give it." And I said, "Okay, fine, I'll give it." Until then, yes, I had been somewhat resistant in doing that. So I've got an AstroBin that I set up in the beginning of the year where I've got a number of images. So far, everything on here is lunar, and you're more than welcome to take a gander there if you'd like. And you're more than welcome to snap pictures, anything of interest during this talk. Excuse me. All right, as Doug said, I've always loved the moon. It can be observed in urban skies and is actually a major outreach target. Like many in the clubs, I was one of those kids that was glued to the TV on July 20th, 1969. And in my case, it was a black and white Zenith TV, and I was the remote. Fast forward to 1998, I got the Celestron Starhopper, the black one that I always bring to star parties as a gift, and I was pointing it at the moon even before I pointed it at a deep sky object, and honestly, before I even had a Telrad to point it on. I found out early on how much fun it is to try to drive a Dob without any sort of pointing device. The moon was pretty easy in that regard. lunar photography versus astrophotography versus EAA. This has all been kind of an evolution because of the pandemic. It's not the same thing. It's like apples, oranges, and grapes, really, because lunar photography can be done in light polluted skies, requires much shorter exposures, and there's a little bit of processing time involved, and so I've got limited experience, but I'm by no means an expert. I still think Robert Reeves in San Antonio sets that bar, and that's the bar I'm continually trying to reach for. So I always consider this a work in progress. Diving in, the astrophotography that the big boys do, like Chris Wells, Trevor, and Doug, and Al Kelly, and so forth, do multiple short subs with hours of acquisition and leading to hours of processing time. EAA is what we've been doing now at the George. This is what we call electronic assisted observatory, and involves anywhere from 20 to 100 plus very short exposures, sometimes 10 seconds with or without guiding. And we process it right there in SharpCap. And while the astrophotography aficionados might wince at that picture, that's actually just 30 compiled shots of M57, and that is actually EAA, and that was done with SharpCap. So that gives us some views that we normally wouldn't see in the eyepiece. So EAA may be here to stay around. Lunar imaging is a little bit different. As I said, it's a very short exposure because the subject is is so bright. And to craft a decent image, though, much like astrophotography, you do need to take quite a bit of care in processing. Courtesy with Rob Reeves' approach, I can look and find it's pretty easy to tell if somebody's been cognizant of what they're doing with their images or not. However, there are commonalities between all of the approaches, and yes, some of these are obvious even to visual observing. There are many factors involved in producing a good image. Clean collimated scope, we'll talk about that. Focus, alignment, and well, to a degree, your scope needs to be aligned. You should plan on what you intend to observe and what you intend to shoot. If you don't have a camera, you can always start with a cell phone. So I've had many people at the outreach events pull out their various phones and plunk it onto the eyepiece and grab something similar to this through the eyepiece. Excuse me. One thing I will note about this picture is this picture shows part of what we need because of the incident light, in this case, coming in on this side on the left, even though the image is flipped. You'll see things kind of really get washed out until we work our way to the terminator, where all the details start showing up. So actually, we want to be chasing that terminator. It's where we're going to get their best resolution and our best, some of our best images. And we can wander a little bit this way toward the sun, but the images start taking a bit more work to process. Truthfully, people say, "Oh, Dave, there's a full moon out tonight." Not shooting it. It's too washed out, and it takes way too much effort to try to process it to get something useful. Now, my very first image that I ever garnered out of a scope, I was using an Orion planetary camera, which is actually an auto-guiding camera as well, with a dated Win 7 32-bit laptop. It was in that 6-inch Dob, totally unguided and untracked. The computer was literally, the scope was literally in the driveway, and the computer was on the tailgate of our F-250. I had Registack take the top 60 frames of 150, and I completely tweaked this exclusively in Registacks. And you can see, oh, there's some decent, this is flipped, south is over here, here's Clavius, Magnus, which I'll show later, and then actually here is Tycho. And it was a reasonable shot. Well, I came along eventually and settled in. This was the Orion Starshoot camera that I'd used for that image. After a bit of a search, I settled in on the QHY 5 178M. See, slightly smaller, modestly smaller pixels, USB, and easily drives under Win 10. However, little did I know that that picture that I took was 110% completely USDA prime choice dumb luck. It took a while before I got something decent and worth showing. I had countless failures after that. I was beginning to doubt my efforts, the brand new camera, the scope, and the entire process, because all I was doing was coming up with stuff like this. There's Alphonsus or Zakel and Ptolemus, and it's just kind of messy. This is blown out. This is actually an oops. It's the camera was set on color when I really wanted it on black and white. It seemed that no matter what I did, things weren't working. So I had to sit down and look and realize I'm waging a war on multiple fronts. I had to know the scope, alignment, collimation. That sent me down the pathway of relearning SCT collimation. I had to know the camera, what exactly I was working with, the acquisition software, in this case, Fire Capture or SharpCap. I do suggest you practice in the daylight. That's one way you can get instant readback on the software. I mainly use, I'll show you in a bit, I mainly use Fire Capture for solar and lunar work, but since I've been working at the West Dome, I've come quite a bit into SharpCap for EAA. Focusing on a screen is nothing like focusing through an eyepiece, so you have to figure out the art of focusing on a screen. Those batten-off masks can help out quite a bit. Know the stacking software, how to make it work, whether that's AutoStacker or Registax, both of those freeware, and your final processing software, whatever that is. In my case, it's Photoshop CC. And I'll make the plug. I went ahead and went with the CC version, the subscription. Big deal. It's $9 a month. But I use it constantly, even for homegrown pictures, as a slight diversion. I don't have to worry about buying the big whole package, and I can stop it whenever I decide to stop using Photoshop. And it's got some nifty features that, to me, make the subscription well worth the effort. So someone asked when I showed a picture of what I was having trouble with, and said, well, what does the histogram look like? And like a blithering idiot, I said, what histogram? It's not the camera's fault. Solution number one was learning that acquisition software. In this case, here's an example of a histogram from Fire Capture. This particular picture, had it been over here, would be way off to the right side and totally blown out. And it's getting it centered, or getting it just right, so you're not blowing out the pixels. So again, I mainly use Fire Capture for this for two main reasons. Mainly the arrows, up and down arrows here, can really split the difference between, say, in this example, 17.8, 17.9 milliseconds. SharpCap is good, but it does not have these arrows, or if it does have those arrows, somebody has yet to show them to me. The other reason I'm also big on Fire Capture is I can take the screen, that's my whole image, whole image of my chip, and I can simply drag and click and set a new region of interest. So I don't have to use the entire chip. I can use just a certain thing if I want to focus on a particular object on the moon. And that's where I'm mainly with Fire Capture for that reason. So the next simple solution was, okay, so we're getting the camera worked out. I think I'm getting the software to acquire the image worked out. Was I had someone tell me, why don't you just put it on a different scope, something where you don't have to worry with all the stuff you have to worry about with an SCT. And I go, well, why didn't I think of that? So I put it on this guy, my wide tube 80 that I used for the eclipse. This is a totally staged photograph. I did not take the image using this rig. This rig actually belongs to Bob Hammond, and he loaned it to me for a little bit. This is the Ioptron AZ mount. I did not have the solar screen on it. I did have the Barlow without the element because I needed the extra back focus for the camera. I had this on Connie's Orion mount, or Orion Atlas mount, and that solved a few problems. As a side note, what advice would we give to beginners wanting to get started in lunar photography? As a slight digression, Don Selly had a bunch of HAS, and I'm also a member there, imagers up for the December meeting, and the pre-meeting, in other words, to get ready for it, the Zoom that you do 3 days before the actual meeting. We were all laughing because the common advice that we came is start simple. So that's why I emphasize go simple. Everybody, all of us, it was funny. We were all laughing. Everybody pulled out the big guns, pulled out the biggest scope with the biggest mount, and tried to immediately jump in and do complex astrophotography. And for many of us, it didn't work. So so there it kind of circles back to the advice of starting simple, and that's what I did here. Third solution I had was try getting the processing worked out. This is not my picture. Well, it is my picture, but the original wave file is not. This was a kind gift from Jeff Lepp of FBAC. He had taken this with one of his medium-sized refractors, and he gave me the video file. And so what I have done through the time is practice on this figure and use this figure as a means of having quality data to work up the procedures to process the image. And every now and then I will turn around and say, hey, Jeff, I've processed it and I think I've made it better. Here it is. I'll send them back to him. So it took a little bit until I was very happy with this one, getting the exposure rights, dodging, burning, sharpening areas, things like that. It was nice to get these ray structures coming out. So with that, I like to think I put it all together, and this is actually the first decent image I got after working on those three areas. This one with the QHY camera, it was a short tube 80 and processing. Well, it may not look as nice as Jeff's, but I'll be honest, the short tube 80 is a different kind of a refractor, and it's not as nice as the one that Jeff uses. But I can see my big three. I can see Ptolemais, Arzachel, etc. I think Magnus is here. That's a shadow of Tycho. And you can see a whole bunch of things here, Sabine and Ritter. So it was not a half bad image for a first attempt. I felt like, okay, it's not the camera. It's always on my side of the keyboard. And I think I'm getting my side of the keyboard straightened out. So I'm playing with two systems right now, the 8-inch SCT and the CG11. Start with a nice clean scope, a nice fully charged battery, cleaning the scope and things of that nature. I talked about that in the already posted December JSCAS meeting where we talked about cleaning and aligning Newtonian telescopes. I covered a fair bit of cleaning in there. So it's keeping it nice and clean is always a good thing. For Newtonian reflectors, here's if you don't want to watch that one, or this YouTube is actually quite handy. If you've got an SCT, this guy works on these all the time, cleans them up. As long as you follow a certain set of guidelines, SCTs actually are fairly simple to take apart and clean. I did that here with the 8-inch SCT. I actually had to pull the corrector plate and clean both sides. It had been stored, and there was kind of a white film on both sides of the corrector plate. I'd since installed Bob's knobs up here on the secondary. Had to go through the arts of collimation. I'm still working with that. I'm kind of getting the hang of it, and I just dropped it. There's a name of a funky little collimation mask that you can use to work that. Focusing. People have issues with focusing because when you're on something in the solar system, and the minute you touch that OTA, your object in the viewfinder bounces like semi-set jello. So people have taken bicycle handles and cut them off and use that and gingerly touch the outside, which is fine. You can also put in the kind of pricey feather touch focusers if you want. I opted for something different. One of the first things I did was put on a 10-to-1 Crayford focuser on the back of both SCTs. I use the main focuser of the SCT to put the mirror at the midpoint, and I do all the focusing with this point, with this Crayford. It gets around the mirror flop issue because the mirror's now staying in one place, and you can put something on here. Robert Rees likes to use a clothespin, but if you look at it, that clothespin is hideously stretched and maxed to its top end. You can see the little ends touching to each other. More often than not, I have reached up in the middle of the night at 4 in the morning, and that clothespin goes kaboing, and half of it goes over my left shoulder, and the other half goes into the pool. So, non-relatedly, I ended up with a 3D printer about 12 months ago, and so I printed up some Feather Touch ones. This one I had to customize for the 8-inch SCT, and this one fits beautifully on the SCT. I just had to shorten the handle, and I just gingerly touch this back and forth, and I can rotate and clear this one 360 degrees without hitting anything. So that helps with that.
David?
Yeah.
We have a question. What Crayford focuser is that?
It's a TP something. I got them both from oh, what a time to gomerize. OPT. Place in Oceanside, California. And you just have to make sure that you're looking to make sure that they fit the right SC, the correct SCTs. They make Crayford focusers for SCTs, and you've got to make sure if you get the 2-inch one, that's for the larger ones, or I think the 1 3/4 is the one I picked up for the 8. So the two Crayford focusers I have for the 2 scopes are not interchangeable, but they had to be bought specifically for each of those scopes. Okay, Feather Touch. Very important alignment. In preparation for the 2017 eclipse, there are phone apps that I'd use Connie and I'd use to align the scope in the daytime. The dirty trick with some of the phone apps is actually you align the polar axis with the South Pole and go from there. It's only an iOS, but right now I employ the Ioptron Polar Alignment tool on my iPad to basically set the direction of the axis relative to the North Celestial Pole. And then I let, I'll tell you in a bit, StarSense do the rest, but I still have to do that with Connie's scope because this is my northern view. I have a nice neighbor, and he probably would not appreciate my jumping the fence to cut a hole in the middle with a chainsaw. But so I've had to try to figure out how to align the scopes without direct access to Polaris. So when it comes to the Celestron product, and I now hear these are available for Skywatcher products, which should include some of the Orion mounts. The StarSense is one of those recommendations I got from Al Kelly, and it's one of those, if Al Kelly recommends it, I was buying it. It's one of those, please take my money. And I have not regretted purchasing this thing at all. Plugs into the side of the mount. It comes in with a new hand controller. It does what we know is plate solving. It swings around. And once, if I got it pretty doggone close to pointing at the North Celestial Pole, StarSense puts this where I almost don't have much in the way of drift. So, but coming back to that, a liberty that you can take with lunar photography, but not traditional photography, is you can keep the cursor on a rim. If you are noticing drift, you can nudge it. You put the hand controller on its lowest setting, and you can nudge it to keep the object in frame. Again, you're taking extremely short pictures. And sure, those frames that are going to be taken while it actually has to nudge a little bit are going to be trash frames. That's okay. In lunar photography, as you'll soon see, we only process 20 to 25%. So some of those frames may up in the bottom 10%, and that's kind of so what. So in looking at that in fire capture, this is what I would see. I would say, okay, this is my region of interest. I'm going to put the cursor here. The cursor does not disappear when fire capture is open. And I will just nudge it to keep it right here. And I've gotten some decent pictures that way. But I'll be honest, if the alignment of the scope is good and StarSense gives me a good alignment, I try not to tear that scope down for a couple of days and get as many lunar images out as I possibly can, particularly if it's rock steady. And I'll show you some where I got it fairly rock steady. So again, this is the basic setup that I have with the camera. I've got to have this is a short cable. I've got to have the laptop fairly close. If I need a Barlow, I can throw in the Barlow. Again, you want to practice focusing and how to focus and know which way you've got to turn the knobs, because it's not parfocal with an eyepiece. In other words, the focal plane with the eyepiece and the focal plane of the camera are going to be two separate places. So I'll start off visually in the direction of the moon, get things set up, and start going. Now, I show this on another part. This is granted from January 2021. Understand that as you go from one phase to another, it could be differences anywhere from 45 to 55 minutes, and the moon's going to come up or set at different times throughout the night. Well, the point being is you don't want to shoot in the long axis of the atmosphere. If you can avoid it, you prefer to shoot straight up, or at least in the shortest part of the atmosphere as you can get. So one time while waiting for the moon, I slewed the scope over and grabbed these. And I have to give major credit to Chris Wells. I took the pictures, but Chris knows Registax far better than I do. And after seeing what some people have done with the same style of camera, I'm thinking these are probably a touch out of focus, particularly Saturn. So I definitely need to use that batten-off mask to try to get that a little bit better next time I try to do planetary. So that's a digression. Let's talk about the workflow. So I start in with fire capture. This captures the AVI file. Use AutoStacker to convert the AVIs to TIFFs. We'll talk about that in a bit. I was using Registax to generate TIFFs and using wavelets, but I've found wavelets to be a very confusing area, or at least for me. So I have AutoStacker go directly to a sharpening, and then from that sharpened TIFF, I go into Photoshop Creative Cloud. This is more the real one here. I have been asked whether or not I do PIPP, Planetary Imaging Preprocessor. No, I've played with it once and didn't really see a major difference, so I don't have it. I've had somebody ask, do I use WinJupo? No, not for the moon. The moon is not rotating as fast as Jupiter at 9 hours. So I don't use really either of those. So I'm really coming fire capture, AutoStacker, let the original come out a tad sharpened, and then jump straight into Photoshop Creative Cloud. In Photoshop is where the work starts into play. Bring it in as a TIFF, then we're going to export it as a JPEG once we're done. But I'll hop into image, immediately flip it to grayscale because Photoshop wants to flip everything to RGB. I'll do filter, denoise, despeckle. Shake reduction is the godsend, and it is almost the sole reason to have Photoshop Creative Cloud. It does wonders even on your own pictures that are not astronomically related. I'll crop the image, get rid of the far edges, go into camera raw. I'll adjust the exposure, contrast. I'll lower the whites, raise the blacks, because there are no grays on the moon. Clarity and dehaze, depending on how much sun I've got in there. I'll increase the DPI to about 300. And then I will burn and dodge and go through every possible crater looking for errors of processing. Bathtub rings, smiley faces, things that shouldn't be there, and we'll burn and dodge them. I'll come in and do a fairly heavy-handed overall sharpening, save that TIFF, and then export it as a JPEG, or I'll sit there in Photoshop and annotate it if I need it, and then export the annotated JPEG. So most of the work is done in Photoshop. So in case here's an actual imaging, I'm using 1528, 1024. I'm using a small region of interest to the camera. I've got the gain setting here. I'm running at 1.9 milliseconds. And I'm doing how many frames? It looks like a 4,000 frame. 4,000 frame. Histogram is here. I've got nothing undersaturated. I don't have anything oversaturated. The smaller ROI gives me a fast frame rate, so I'm up to about 106 frames a second, and it's burning away. I will come back and talk to this. You will need to have plenty of disk space. I've started an imaging session and easily filled 350 gigs in just one evening.
David?
Yeah.
Can I interrupt you for a second here?
Sure.
Can you tell us what the dodge and burn is doing for you?
Dodging and burning is actually, I won't say suppressing, but sort of bringing out some things that are underexposed. Or in some cases, if it's overexposed, I will kind of want to mask it down and try to pull data out of it to make a decent picture. I know you don't want things that are too bright. You don't want things that are too dark unless it's actually in a shadow. So that's a feature that is in that is in Photoshop that can let you enhance an image.
Okay, two additional questions. Do you use any filters for lunar photography?
Oh, one good question. Yes, I do. I do use an IR cut filter. So I think that's cutting everything off about 760 or 770 on up.
Okay, and lastly, in the Photoshop portion where you're going through your workflow within Photoshop,
Yeah.
would you be willing to share what settings you're doing in those different elements?
I can, but they're actually kind of unique for each individual picture, but that's certainly possible.
Or possibly what your thought process is on each of those and or what you're looking for.
You're looking for clarity and something that's going to look good on the screen that gives you high contrast and high detail. So it starts becoming a bit of an art form within Photoshop. I hate to use that because I like to do things pragmatically, methodologically, so that I can actually have fairly consistent picture production. I will cut to the chase of a slide a ways away. I actually had to take 2 months off of lunar imaging and just learn Photoshop. So I buried myself in YouTube on how to use Photoshop, and I asked a few questions of Bob Reeves about how he did things, and he was forthcoming with that information. But yeah, you have to learn Photoshop if to really get the pictures that pop.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
All right. Okay, let me see if I can do this one. See if that will come up over this. Okay, that should be on the screen there. This is Rimihygenus. This is actually a vid of pictures you're going to see later. And you can actually see it is wobbling. It's good and steady. This is where I had that star sense working for me. And the moon is actually pretty quiet. This was taken at about 4 in the morning. If it's coming in and wobbling like semi-set jello, you're going to get what you get. But the stiller, the quieter the atmosphere is, the quieter the moon is, the better you'll be. Now, I do want to highlight, even though it's going to die on me, I'm going to tell you to do it again, and I will whip that out this way. You might actually see some of these rills start popping in and out, and things here for the Tresnecker hip here. I'm sorry, Rimihygen. When you start seeing this kind of detail in the center spur peak and some of the stuff within craters, you've also hit a good focus too. And I cannot emphasize the importance of seeing. Bad seeing is just as bad as being slightly off with focus. So you've got to make sure that focus is on there and hope you're out in the night when you've got good seeing. Okay, so that worked reasonably well. Okay, stacking. As I said, I use AutoStacker here, pulls in the AVI file, and the output's going to be a 16-bit. I am considering doing a basic AutoStacker on what I do to get an image and put that through YouTube, because my workflow in this has changed a little bit. So I'm having it go as an output TIFF, top 10 and top 20 frames. I'll usually go top 20, top 25 at most. I have taken good data, such as Jeff's picture, Jeff's vid that I showed you a few slides ago, and I've done stack 20, 20, 50, 80%, and I can't tell the difference between them. As long as you don't incorporate the really, really bad frames, it's hard to tell. So the easiest thing is just 20, 25% is all you really need. AutoStacker, it's pretty self-explanatory in that regard. After evaluating, and this is a dream. This is this is one of my files. I was just surprised. I almost never get a quality graph that looks like this, where so much of it is good quality, particularly when it's looking like what it looks over here on the right-hand side. Usually this green line comes down, and usually by right about here, it's already passing down. And this is all the crap and the debris and crappy frames you don't ever want to use. So this is also part of the reason we only use the top 20 to 25% of the frames when we're stacking. Excuse me. I don't know how it does it. It's math. Probably those horrific matrix formulas we all did in Algebra 2. But what it does is it takes the entire vid and divides the entire thing frame by frame from, in this case, frame 1 to frame 4000, and it ranks them, and then it knows which frames to pick out for the additional processing steps. It just does it. I have it sharpened. I do have it saved in folders on the hard drive, and then it will give me the stacked sharpened images. So let's get serious. Get back to Rima-Hygenus. Here's a still from that 35-second vid. Yeah.
Back on that auto stacker slide, have you tried using the drizzle down there on the lower?
It's recommended. I've never tried. I have tried it, and I've not seen that it makes any difference for lunar and solar imaging. My word on the street is to leave it off. I haven't found much of a reason to turn it on. If somebody's got a different thing, I'm more than willing, but I have tried a couple of processings with a drizzle at 1.5 and didn't see a major difference.
Okay, thank you.
Also, my default answer to that is Robert Reeves leaves it off. So if he does, so for a time there until I've started to branch out on my own, if he did something, I was doing it, and he never uses the drizzle. Okay.
One more
Sure.
came in. What is the minimum number of good frames you target?
Total number of frames. I like to shoot for 4,000. I'll go anywhere from 3 to 5. Sometimes I've gone 2,000 frames. I really don't like going less than 2,000, but my rule of thumb is to go for 4,000. That was a reduced region of interest, and that particular thing of Rima-Hygen there was 4,000 frames in 35 seconds. Okay, if it's a larger ROI, then it's going to be a slower frame rate, and it's going to take you longer.
Okay, and did you do the percentage was the 10 to 20 range?
Yeah, I'll play with that. Sometimes I'll see what the 10% and see what the 20 or 25% looks like. So you can do, let me go back to that. You can do multiples here. If you wanted to do 5, 10, 20, and 25, have it stacked into folders, AutoStacker will do it. It'll put them all into folders, and you can evaluate them individually. The one thing about, where are we? September, I'd say just short of my getting this data back in November, December of last year, Bob came back to me one day and said, "Aren't you using this in batch mode?" And I said, "What batch mode?" I was processing each file individually. I said, "Oh, no, here, do this. I can actually group. I can actually grab 15 AVI files, set up the folders, set up the percentages, and say, import it. I babysit it through the first file, then I can go to bed. I wake up the next morning, AutoStacker's done all the work for me. And I have all 20 some odd videos or images, all that data already put into folders, ready to start looking at and seeing which ones I want to relabel and take over to Photoshop. Okay.
Thank you.
There's a still from that 30-second vid, and you can see a little bit of detail. Here's that's 20% of the frames there. AutoStacker has applied some sharpening, so this is where life starts to kind of get nifty, because now you're starting to see these individual craters pop out. You're starting to see the rills pop out a little bit of detail in some of the craters, some of the floor fractured craters, mountain area, and then in Photoshop, you kind of just get that little extra pop. You get the little extra detail inside some of the craters. Things over here, you actually start seeing some detail between these two plates. Now, this is thought to be a volcanic vent. Excuse me. I have a slide that I did not include of 1966 when the original Apollo 20 landing sites were supposed to be. And I do believe at one time, I believe it was Apollo 17 was supposed to be in this area. I'm sorry, check that. It's Apollo 16 because they thought this was most recent volcanic activity. These two plates literally pulled away from each other tectonically and opened up this oops. These two plates pulled apart and the ground just fell in. And then this is this center thing is the main area of volcanic activity. So you just get lost in all the nifty details here. So that's the final finished one. All four, you can see from vid, AS stack to sharpen to final. And then basically, how important is the processing? You can see, oh, a decent picture here. And then now you've got something here that's a decent high resolution picture. Take it over to Photoshop, as I said. As I've already mentioned, if you don't know Photoshop, you've got to make that a priority. Otherwise, you're just kind of following somebody else's workflow. And that's fine to a point, but eventually at some point you have to play with it and know what sliders do what. But there's a decent image of Theophilus down here in Marinette Terrace with that center spur peak and all the fractured wall here. So there we go with the materials and methods on going from optics, camera, image acquisition to processing to here we go. Let's jump in and take a gander at some images. So this is an early one. I need to revisit this because I am always on the hunt for Apollo landing sites, even to repeat photograph them. So during this pandemic, I've taken a lot of pictures from the backyard. So seeing is absolutely paramount, and we're all right here. We've got Sabine, Crater Ritter, Crater Moltke. We've got some of the rills down here. You have got, I believe it is Aldrin, Collins, and Armstrong over here. And Collins is the Collins is the smallest of them, being at about 2 miles in diameter. So I like to think optimistically I'm down here at about a mile resolution. And here is this little guy here. It may be tough on the screen. It's called Cat's Paw. And right about over in here is the 11 landing site. So I do want to try to get that a little bit better. But I have shown this to people and say, that's nice, but could you possibly annotate it? And I have no problem annotating. Everything I'm going to show from here on out will be annotated. I kind of prefer it that way. So I'm always on the hunt for these. This one is actually out of place, but this is on the north side of Mare Imbrium. We've got the crater Plato, Alpine Valley in here. Mount Pico is actually a 10,000-foot mountain, and you might notice the shadows. This is in the very long part of the waning cycle. This was probably a 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and the sun is way over on the other side. So this is where we're getting all of these shadows cast. But interesting detail. Up at the top, where Serenity and this other mare starts, Poseidonus with his floor fractured crater. You come down here to Taurus Littrow region, and I've got it blown up here just to the short point of pixelating it. You've got mountains on 3 sides. They talk about a pinpoint landing, came over on their backs, and Apollo 17 landed right here. I don't see it coming up, but actually I have a paper by Harrison Schmidt who revisited the topology and geology of Taurus Littrow in an Icarus 2013 paper. And he talks about the high reflective albedo, and that kind of indirectly answered a question that I had, because you can only catch this area plus or minus 2 days of it being illuminated in either a waxing or a waning moon. And it's because it's so highly reflective. Once the sun really starts catching it at a certain angle, it becomes very difficult to get decent resolution in the area. So it's good to see that. Apollo 15, over on the other side of Mare Imbrium, we've got Archimedes. We've kind of got this big slide in here. We've got the Hadley-Apennine mountain range. If you can see the beginnings of the rill here, you're doing pretty well as far as seeing. Hadley C is a common spot here. This mountain right here is Mount Hadley at 14,000 feet. They came over the mountains on their backs, flipped over, and landed right here within lunar rover driving distance of the rill. And it is the one mission where they really started doing the science because they had been trained by a couple of geologists. Hop over to 16. You've got Theophilus here that I showed with the multi-center spur peak. You come over here, and if you start looking in the area, you're going to see two of these two craters that are conjoined by a common wall. And though Dahlund is missing the southern wall here, you've got two craters that are roughly the same size. Once you get that locked in your mind's eye, you're going to find you don't see that very often on the lunar surface. And when you do find them, and you just come to the east just a little bit, you're going to see two white spots. I just dropped what that one was called, South, not Massif, that's Apollo 17. These two white specks, and then just inside the white specks on Descartes Highland is where Apollo 16 landed. If you jump all the way over to the other side, south of Mare Imbrium into Procellarum, you've got Reinhold, and then way off the screen at roughly the same angle, you're going to have Copernicus. We've got Landsberg down here. Out here in the middle of nowhere is Apollo 12. Apollo 12 and Apollo 14 are probably the two of the toughest landing sites to identify because there's not a lot of major structure around them. 14 is okay if you find the crater Perry and you see this streak of mountains that were here before all the lava came in, and you can kind of learn your way and leapfrog over to a plateau over here at Frau Morrow. That's where 14 landed. But 12 is out here in the middle of freaking nowhere. Apollo 12 is going after Surveyor. They landed on a bunch of craters called Snowman. It does actually look like a snowman from a particular point of view. It's got a head, a body, and it's got two craters that sort of look like the legs. But the largest crater of the body is barely 300 feet in diameter. And they kind of landed Apollo 12 at roughly 3 o'clock, and Surveyor was down around 6 o'clock. Well, with a crater being 300 feet across, you're not going to see that through a ground-based scope. Best anyone has ever done, and that includes Luc Catharda in France and Bob Reeves, is maybe 0.7 of a mile with absolute gorgeous seeing, crystal clear seeing, cool, clear, crisp night, very steady atmosphere, and probably no more than a 2 or 3x, possibly. Well, Luke would use a 4x Barlow. You're still going to not have any resolution better than about 0.7 of a mile. So we'll never see snowman in a crater. Although that one Indian satellite has come in with some exceptional resolution. That thing, I think, just got into orbit, and I only saw some of the Apollo 11 data a little while ago. Coming back a little bit, if you go to Sabine and Ritter, and you find Mulkey, there's 11. If you come hop, 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 here's Lindsay and Dahlund again, those two conjoined craters. You can see there's not any set of craters around them that looks anything like it. You've got 16. So you've got 16 and 11 in the same shot. Not my best picture, but it is what it is for right now. Let's talk about libration a little bit. I want to draw your attention up here to Humboldtiatum. And you can see at least you've got Clavius, Magnus, and Tycho up here, and you've got Mare Frigolis, and you've got this is all kind of squished up here. Well, it turns out Sonny Manley gave me this site because one day I set up, and sure enough, all of a sudden, Lady Luna is really showing me her forehead, if you will. This is that Mare Frigolis sinus down here. I said, where'd all of this come from? How come I'm looking at all of this? Well, this is libration in action. It's like she's nodding, tipping her head, and showing me the forehead. So there are craters here I had never seen, and craters that are not even on my map. There's a few things up here that are definitely not on my commonly used map. The one that really blew my socks off was on another evening. Here's Mare Humboldt Titanium in full view. Most often, this is sitting way over here, is just a kind of a burp on the horizon, if you will. So in this case, Lady Luna was showing me more like her left shoulder. Endymion is sitting here, Belkovich, Belkovich. It was just an incredible view. This is where one time where I simply grabbed a single frame out of the AVI, sent it to Sonny Manley, and I said, am I really looking at what I'm looking at? And he comes back and says, yes. Says, keep imaging, you did well. I said, okay. Then at the bottom, with the moon showing me more of her forehead, I've got Tycho, Manganus, and Clavius. Normally, I see Clavius in more of an oval, more of a round thing where I can see these 5 interweaving craters a bit easier. Well, what she's kind of doing here, she's sort of kind of hiding her belly button, if you will. And so this part is tipped away, while the other part, the northern part, as I've mentioned, is tipped toward me. So this has been an interesting education in the moon's libration. Again, showed this one as the final. This is the final image. Rimihygenus total RIL is 132 miles long. Quick check of the notes. Nope, we're good. Again, that's the website for the libration. You can actually see it working in real time. Brought this up again, and then I come over here to Ptolemais, Alphonsus, and Arzachelus. There's 3 separate craters, all completely different parts of lunar history. So if you're just saying, oh, they're just 3 craters, well, okay. This one is probably the oldest, 153 kilometers across. There's not a lot of thing in it. There's not a lot of structure in the walls. There's no center spur peak. This one probably hit largely when the moon was semi-solid and largely still consisting of lava. Alphonsus has got a little bit of structure to it, at least in the walls. There's a remnant of a center spur peak, so things are probably still a little semi-soft, but nowhere near as soft as it was for Ptolemais. Arzachelus is probably the youngest crater because you have a very clearly defined center spur peak, and if you notice by the stats, it's also deeper. Floor fractured crater, terraced collapsed walls, and other things. I will bring your attention to this little run of dribbling craters over here. They're called catenas, and I will bring up that toward the end. But this is actually one of my, I like this shot. One thing I do want to bring up is the biggest crater that we're aware of is our good old friend Meteor Crater. But Meteor Crater is barely 3,800 feet across, some 560 feet deep, and energy impact is about 10 megatons, 1.15 kilometers across. So if you go for Ptolemais at 153 kilometers, what kind of energy it took to make that crater? It makes you think a little bit. Of course, also the running internet joke was the people in this visitor center were really lucky because the crater just barely, the meteor just barely missed them. But if you take Ptolemais and you plunk it on a map, here's how big this one is. This would go from Galveston to just short of College Station, from one end to the other. So some of these craters, it's very easy to take for granted how big some of these craters are on the moon. All right, coming back to lunar images up at the top, northern side, I got a hold of this peninsula and some of the terraced walls here, Exodus and Aristotle's crater there. Again, this is the not Hadley Apennine. Taurus Littrow area, the northern part of the moon. Down here is Tranquility. Again, I mentioned this one before. I probably should have taken that one out. Ah, there's the paper I was talking about. I was wrong. 2017 at Caris. Elsevier is a noted publisher, at least in my realm of the world. I'm assuming Icarus is a good journal in the field of space sciences. H. Schmidt, Harrison Schmidt, Apollo 17 lunar module pilot. Okay, Schroeder's Valley off to the west side. The crater detail, the walls are kind of a waffle board, if you will, looking around. And Schroeder's Valley is a volcanic vent. This is a place that was also slated for a possible Apollo mission. Now, one thing I want to get into is craters. If you look at craters in a little bit of details, and yes, this is a small digression, and I have a series of blankets here, and you have an impactor that comes in and hits your surface. What happens is your layers fold back on themselves as part of the impact. So you can see that this slightly dog-haired German Shepherd hair-covered blanket is rolled back. Same one for this one and the two towels in between. Well, this is exactly what they noted when they were studying Meteor Crater. They had named the layers after Indian tribes. So this Toro Weep layer down here, they found it as the very top layer. They're saying, wait a minute, what's going on here? We're finding this layer here, and we're finding it umpteen feet below. And then they find they're doing the same thing with Kebab, and then Moen Kopi, the same thing here, but they're not finding anything of this layer up there. So what's going on? They realize these layers just flop back like this. And you can see that on Copernicus, which is always an outreach favorite. All of this, from where the red dot is all flopping back. And then a lot of this stuff here is all from the ejecta being thrown out. If you take a rock and you throw it into the sand, you're going to get little specks of sand that fly out this far. And this stuff is flopping back and flying back for miles. So Copernicus is 56 miles across and 2.3 miles deep. And all of this is just ejecta that you can see here. It's like the more you see, the more you look, the more you see. Down south, we've got Schiller. Schiller, I'm convinced, is a glancing blow, and nobody has said anything to the contrary. In studying Meteor Crater, Morris Barringer found that he could take rocks, steam-powered cannons, and bullets and go as low as a 30-degree angle and still get a relatively circular crater. So for this crater to occur meant this really had to be a very shallow glancing blow. Now, whether this over here is just crud piled up, that's probably what it is. I doubt it's probably the final resting place of that meteor. But it very clearly is a glancing blow, 43 miles across, 100 miles wide, and about 2.3 miles deep. It's down on the southeast side. Again, we have Ptolemy, Alphonsus, or Zachel, Perry up here for Apollo 14 on the other side, and the straight wall. Let's talk about the straight wall a little bit. Let's dial in on that. Straight wall measures long, some 65 miles long, approximately 160 feet high. It's actually an escarpment where the geology shifted a little bit, and it is shifted in this kind of a direction. So what you're actually seeing with the sun coming down this way is the shadow of that escarpment. When you're seeing it in the other direction, you're actually seeing the reflective nature of this wall. It is much more visible in a waxing moon than it is a waning moon, but it can be seen in both phases. Forget a full moon; it's completely blown out in a full moon. Coming back to Marinette Terrace, this is one of the more recent ones, and it's kind of closing up on the images. Theophilus, Kryllus, Caterin. I can get lost in the details over here. And then Marinette Terrace, which I really love. This is actually the Rupus Altai. This is actually the rim of the crater for Marinette Terrace. All this stuff filled in afterward. But you see all these tiny, tiny little craters all over the place. Detail on Piccolamini. And again, you kind of see these little catenas here, And then I've got them split in two directions, here and here. So I asked around and did a net search on how these catenas are formed, and I didn't find anything very satisfying. One possible suggestion had been thermal activity on the moon. I kind of discounted, even though I'm not a lunar geologist, rocks bouncing and going for distances after a while. That started not making sense. So I called up our local LPI expert and I said, Walt Kiefer at the LPI, how are these catenas done? And I sent him this picture. And he said, actually, that is a hot area of research right now, and it's all conjecture because they have to wait until one actually forms. But the hypothesis that makes perfect sense to me, at least, is these are tiny little wisps off of comets. And analogous to Shoemaker-Levy that hit Jupiter, these are very tightly bunched set of rocks that may stretch, 20, 30 miles, but they're grouped very tightly together enough that you will get almost linear, but get craters almost adjacent to each other that hit. And the more you look, the more you see these catenas in various high-resolution pictures. And I said, Walt, is there any proof of that so far? And he says, not yet, but that's the current theory. So I thought that was really cool. Okay, to do imaging, you will need a ton of storage space. The best option is a dedicated computer. On average, a 4,000 frame AVI will take 40 to 70 seconds to record and easily be 4 to 10 gigs. And it depends on the region of interest. So while your evening plan may include 7 or so regions of interest, you may find yourself wandering. I'm like a kid in a candy store. Ooh, what's that? Take a picture of it. Ooh, what's this? Take a picture of it. As I said earlier, I have filled as many as 300 gigs in one evening. So I'm on my now my fourth portable hard drive for this. I'll hold the images. I will keep the videos only if they are producing really, really good pictures and I might want to revisit with them. Other time, I generate the sharpened TIFF and I bail the AVIs. You trust me, you don't want to be a hoarder of video files of the moon, particularly if the video files are marginal. You will make mistakes. Just accept it. I don't call failing. I call it first attempts in learning. Focus. Spend some time figuring out how to get your scope to focus. Figure out that histogram. Figure out the seeing. Whether or not you can walk out and look at a field in the evening and go, it's too moist. The seeing's not going to be good. Or, ooh, this might be a good night to set up and go for it. False parallel ridges can be done, can show up here because of processing errors. Major processing errors are gray shadows or no gray shadows. I borrowed this sheet from, or these tidbits from Robert Reeves. Bathtub rings or gray concentric circles within shadow craters. You need to burn those out. Baggage tags are patches of false data that are attached to real data by a very thin bridge. Parallelism, false ridges, I just showed you an example of that. These are processing errors, and you might need to play with the stacking a little bit. False center peaks, central spur peaks. Craters smaller than 15 miles or 24 kilometers do not have center peaks. So if you look down and you see Dolland or Hadley C having a small peak, those are craters that are less than 15 miles across. No, that's an artifact. And dust donuts on the optics. How do you improve? I've had this one from the previous one. Reach out of your weight class, find out those who are doing it better. To extent, try to thrive on failure, hypothesize what the current error is, and pray for a clear night and keep going. Uwe Melling in Germany is using a Zeiss Cassegrain 400 millimeter. He'll use it at a total focal length of 6,600, and he will get pictures like this of Clavius, or in this case, Theophilus and Cyrillus. He'll just get an incredible image. Remember this guy way down at the bottom, Clavius. I'm not even going to highlight it there because Uluk Catharta has done this with a 625 millimeter Newtonian and a 4x Barlow. And he's using it with the same camera I am. So he's this absolutely gorgeous picture of Clavius at the south end. rarely is this a event that rarely a thing that is done by yourself. So I've had very helpful discussions from Doug Holland, Al Kelly, Chris Wells, Trevor Quinn, Jeff Lepp, Sonny Manley over at FBAC, and Robert Reeves, the Facebook Moon Photography Group, and some hanging on cloudy nights to see what's going on. And with that, I thank you, and I'll be happy to bluff my way through any questions.
Okay, here's one, David. If the features you referred to are due to comets, have any of them been correlated to known comet paths?
I'm not sure they know, because I think if Walt knew that, he would have told me. He just came back in a fast email when I asked him that question. He said, "This is the current thought. There's no active. It's one of these. They're watching for it, but it hasn't happened yet. But it's the hypothesis that makes the most sense, because some of those. How do you get two parallel catenas there and just to the west side of Marinette Terrace? Why are they always in a line? The rolling rock thing would think the rock would make consistently sized craters as it bounces. I don't know. So it made intuitive sense to me. But he said it's an area under active investigation.
Okay, I think that's it. I'm going to pass it back to Doug.
Cool.
Doug, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm unmuted. Okay, so David, thank you very much for that very interesting talk. And I know I said this before, but actually, it's impressive to me how your lunar photography has improved over time. It's really coming along. It's really very impressive. So thanks for sharing that with us. Next up, we have a DIY Astronomy Adventures in Arduino Scope with Trevor Quinn. With that, I'd like to pass it over to Trevor.
Thank you, Doug. It's going to take me a second to get set up here.
That's okay.
All right. Here we go. Adventures in Arduino Scope. The first thing is, what is an Arduino Scope? Basically, it's a German equatorial mount control system, much like any of the newer telescope mounts have. The difference is this is an open sourced Arduino-based system that you build yourself, as opposed to, well, I guess ultimately you're buying it because you've got to buy all the components, but you're not buying it off the shelf ready to go. You have to buy the components and build it out. It's an open source project that was launched in 2015 by Desislav Gugasnov, and it was originally released in 2017. There are additional key developers that have helped with the project, and these folks are very forthcoming with information and assistance through various online communities. What is an Arduino board? Well, basically, Arduino is also an open source project, and you can build an Arduino board by yourself, or you can purchase one from Arduino themselves that's already fully assembled. But it's basically an electronic microcontroller prototyping platform. So you build an electronics project or robotics project, any kind of home automation type project, and you build out based on components that you can buy and add to this. and it's capable of reading and responding to digital inputs and analog inputs, as well as being able to have serial communications. Now, let's move on to the features of an Arduino Scope. Okay, so the Arduino Scope, it'll have a couple of databases for objects for go-to. It will calculate the local sidereal time and hour angle of objects. It'll move, slew your telescope to those objects. It does have the ability to have auto tracks. You can also, in some cases, through an additional project, add in auto guiding. And then there are several different areas where you can utilize Bluetooth module with it and control the unit remotely from either an app on the Android platform, or you can hook it into a Stellarium type program and control it that way.
Hey, Trevor?
Yes.
Trevor, we have a question for you. It appears that your slides are not advancing. Are they supposed to have been by now?
No,
we're still seeing the same first slide.
It should have advanced. It's advanced on my side.
No, it's on the YouTube channel and on StreamYard. It's still on the first slide.
Okay, let's. Okay, I'm back on the first slide. Now I've switched to the second slide. Do you see that?
It did not change.
All right. Let me come over here. Let's see if it'll do it over here.
Yeah, so I'm seeing your cursor moving around in the first slide, but no changing.
Yeah, I'm trying to see it on that slide, and I'm not seeing it over there. All right. Let me stop sharing, and I'll try and reshare it. Okay, did the screen change at all?
Oh, you're on the first slide right now.
Yeah, is it showing the first slide with the all the navigation on it?
Yeah, it's showing the first slide with all the other slides on the left-hand side, small versions of the other slides. Oh, okay. There you go. All right. Now you're seeing just the first slide, but it's full screen.
Okay, let me see if it'll switch now to this next slide.
Yes, it switched to the next slide now.
Okay, I don't know why it did that. Okay.
We're not meant to know.
Okay, there was the Arduino board slide, and we were into the features slide, which is this one. And I've placed these sources on. Let me go back and click through them slowly, so if anybody wants to see the sources of what I've spoken about earlier. I've got the sources where this information came from listed at the bottom of each slide. Okay, and this is where we've caught up to. And with the back to this with the external Stellarium type program, you can have access to larger star catalogs for pointing the device. And there's alignment built into it to where you can do a 1-star alignment or an iterative alignment on multiple stars. Next set of features has GPS built in as an add-in module. There's a stellar map built into the program that you can select and view where you're pointed. There's a touchscreen display. There's a real-time clock that gets updated from the GPS unit. There's temperature and humidity sensor that can be tracked. There's a joystick that will help you center the movement, center the object during the slew. And there is a switch for toggling between the screen being in a day mode versus a night mode, which basically turns the screen kind of red. And then I'll jump to an example of one in motion here. Just a second, I gotta switch to a different presentation. Okay, so this is one where he's controlling it from Stellarium over the Bluetooth.
So let's see.
And this is actually the guy that created the whole project. So there's his unit on the table, and then he's hooked up to his mount.
You will notice on the screen right now that there is information that this object has been pushed through Stellarium.
In just a second, we'll get to where it's actually doing a movement.
Simply because Stellarium does not provide additional information.
Okay, you can see the telescopes, the drive motors are moving, and it's he's definitely got the position changed.
And we will see it appear here.
All right, I'm going to stop that. Switch back to the presentation. Okay. Then I'll show you the schematic of the thing. So this is basically what I'm using to go on to build it. They have an optional SD card reader for playing music, which I chose not to put in there. Then this is the back side of the touch screen. Then there's the Bluetooth module. There's an additional SD card reader that's optional. This is a buck converter for guaranteeing your 5-volt output. This is a joystick. This stuff down here is for the guiding circuit. This is the switch for the day-night mode. Then you have a speaker that will play some audible tunes. This is the GPS module. Over here you have the real-time clock. There's a couple of fans for keeping the drive motors cool. And then the temperature humidity sensor. The centerpiece is the Arduino board that was shown earlier. And you have 3 drive motors, or 3 drive controllers for the drive motors. There's one for RA, one for deck, and one for focus if you choose to do that as well. Then we'll go on to what my wiring looks like for my prototype, which is a big spaghetti mess. And I've got everything at this point wired in and ready to start doing some tests. And then we'll take a look at my first test.
Okay, Trevor, one question. So
Yeah.
in your wiring pictures, what was the difference between your left-hand picture and your right-hand picture?
In that, okay, let me go back to that. In this one, okay, the left-hand picture, I was just testing to see if I got one motor to run. Then I went on and added the second motor and added the rest of the components in there.
Okay, thanks.
All right, and then I got to switch screens again. All right, so here's the first test where I have both motors hooked up.
One star.
Yeah.
And this is just going to go through the alignment.
Sure.
And you'll see that deck motor kick. You'll see the flag turning on it, and then that'll run for a little bit. And then eventually the RA will kick in and run, and then they'll both settle down after that. And they both start out slow and then get up to speed, and then they slow back down, so it's not a hard start and hard stop as the slew occurs. There goes that RA flag turning now. The deck's starting to slow down and stop, and now the RA is starting to slow down and stop. And at that point, it gives you the option to make sure that your object is centered, so you can use the joystick to make last-minute adjustments. And we're going to switch back to the presentation. All right. So I can't just leave all of this alone or on its own, so I have to build an enclosure for it. So this is parts of the enclosure, which is just a regular project box, and then I'm putting in connectors and everything for power. I cut out a slot for the touch screen, and then kind of laying out where things are going to fit inside once it's all done. Started doing some of the pre-wiring for those external connections to be connected into the devices. Then we worked on mounting the deck motor. So there's the Chris running the drill press on an aluminum plate that we will attach as the platform to mount the motor to. And here's a Los Mandy G11 mount that we're mounting this to. And this is what the motor looks like. Then we have a picture of the build team, which is myself and Chris. And then we have our quality assurance inspector, which is Chris's cat, Pika. And then we'll go to a video of working prototype with both motors on. So I'll have to switch to that video real quick. Okay, here's the screen where it's trying to acquire the GPS signal from the GPS unit. So it takes it a minute or so before it syncs up. Here's the mount. It's found 4 satellites. Now it's actually got some GPS data in it. And it's up to 7 satellites, and it's going to say we're good. And then we're check the date and time, accept that. It's also got a button for summertime versus standard time. This is back to that alignment procedure that we saw earlier. And here's where both motors are running and spinning the mount on both axes. And let's go ahead and jump this video a little bit further into the future. Okay, here's the fans. Here, let me back that up. I turn the fan on, and there's the fan now spinning. And turn it off, and it'll stop. And then go pick a target. I'm going to take an object out of the Messier catalog. And back to the mount moving to the new object. There's the motors running. Go ahead and jump it a little further. And once you're on your target, the tracking is turned on and your mount is ready going. And we'll switch back to the presentation. And then a future state. This is kind of what I want to get to with the project. This is somebody else's project, and I'll show the quick video on that. This guy tied in a Google Assistant. And you'll see his motor start to turn. And that's good enough on that. I think that would be an absolute kick at outreach events.
Hey, Trevor, the video did not come up.
It didn't come up?
No, we're still seeing the four of us. We didn't see the video.
All right, let's try that again. Okay, do you see it now?
I see something.
Do you see it?
It says Stellarium over Bluetooth.
Okay, that's the wrong one. Hold on.
Know that I'm still working on.
Okay, do you see?
Yes, this is the one with the Google Assistant.
Okay, let's try this again.
Okay, Google. Send go home.
Okay, sending go home to telescope.
Okay, Google. Go to NGC 225.
Okay, moving telescope to NGC 225. Step back, please.
Okay, Google. Send stop tracking.
Okay, sending stop tracking to telescope.
Okay, Google. Send start tracking.
Okay, sending start tracking to telescope.
Okay, so you get the gist, and like I said, I think that would be a great fun at an outreach event where you could let the public just tell the telescope where to go. And we'll switch back to the presentation. Okay, the presentation up, Doug?
Yes, looks good.
Okay. And this basically will conclude, and I want to give special thanks to Chris Wells for his help with this project, as well as Doug Holland. Special thanks to Don Halter, and then Carrie Noe and others on the Arduino Scope Facebook support group. Thank you.
Okay, Trevor, we just had a question for you. Okay, so is all the support for this project from the Facebook group, or is there another source of information about this project?
There's Facebook group. There's support on the Arduino site itself. Well, there's information on the Arduino site itself, and then there is information on Hackaday, and there is videos on YouTube, and then all the source files I've been able to pull off of GitHub.
Okay, and then one more question. The Arduino you use, does it only work with one of the Arduino models, or does it work with more than one of the Arduino models?
This particular one only works with the one model, the Arduino Do. Basically because it's a 32-bit system. So it's got a little more horsepower behind it.
Okay, thank you. I think that'll do it. And
I'll switch back to you, Doug.
All right. Okay, Trevor. Well, thank you very much for that presentation. That's quite a project. You guys have put a lot of work into that. We appreciate all the good work that you guys have done on that, and hope you'll keep us updated on how things go and what the results are.
Yeah, we'll do additional testing even tonight. Headed over to Chris's after here, so
That's what I heard.
we're gonna actually put the scope on it and see if it actually points it in the right direction.
So tonight is the first test with a telescope attached. Is that correct?
Correct.
Wow. Okay, that's going to be cool.
And it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, looks like it. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. Thanks for putting that presentation together. Okay, so next up we have David Haviland with Star Party News. So we'll pass it back to David. Oops.
David, you have a go.
All right. Let the voice rest a little bit. So we're going to jump into Star Party News. And even though initially this week I didn't have a lot, this turned into almost another presentation. So let's just jump right in. We didn't have anything since July 17th. But this coming week from tonight, September 17th, we have an event at the Hack Winery, 6 to 10 p.m. Sunset's still crouching around 8 o'clock, so that is not for the love of the moon, but to give us a target. We will have a first quarter moon to work with. I will be talking about for the club's trip to Fort McCavett in a little bit. It has been moved, so it's no longer originally the 7th to the 9th of October. October 15th, we will have the all clubs meeting virtually courtesy of HAS. Literally, while in the middle of Trevor's talk, I got a note from Dr. Pat Reef. She is confirmed and good to go. She will be delighted to be our all club speaker on October 15th. Title is to be announced. On the 16th, Saturday, weather permitting, while we normally would have a day, it's actually we're going to do an after discussion. Myself with Leonard Ferguson, Kavita's self, and Tracy Noss. We're going to run an extended night that night. It's going to be the International Observe the Moon night. We'll have a few deck scopes out, and most of the domes will probably be using EAA. We're likely going to probably run this from 6 to 11 and just let people have enough time to come out. They will still have to abide by social distancing and have tickets. I think tickets will be free, but they will be reserved tickets, and only a certain number of people, I believe, will be allowed during the hour time slots. We haven't firmed up the times yet. That's something we still need to do. November 1st through 6th is the El Dorado Star Party. I know a few people are thinking about that. November 7th through 8th is the club's trip to Fort McCavett. This is its new date. Then we finish up so far the year on November 19th at the winery. Our own Chris Randall, I've owed this to him for two meetings, so you have my apologies, Chris. But I finally got this together. Chris went chasing after the ISS and its transitions through both the sun and the moon. And here's the rig he used. You recognize the all reliable truck. It's got a sunshade, a ladder, and he attaches the camera and goes for it. And he got this through the sun. This is August 8th. This is misnomed. This August 8th, 2021. So this is just barely, last month. Sun coming through. The position of transits this way from lower right to upper left, coming across. There is a website for this called transitfinder.com. You punch in your longitude, latitude, elevation, select the time span and the traveling distance you're willing to go, and the transit finder will will get you the information on whether or not you want to try to decide to see if you can put yourself on a center line or close to a center line of an ISS transit. Sonny Manley did something similar, and actually found he had a transit through the sun right in the middle of his backyard. Well, it looks like Chris had to go to different places, so I'm going to try to queue up Chris's vids. I have them in VLC Media Player. It should be there. They're going to run sequentially. The very first file is literally 1 second, and you have to watch very carefully. I'll try to fly it a couple of times. And then the second one is the ISS transiting the moon at a quarter speed. Seeing wasn't the best, but I'll run that one again too. So let's try to queue up the first one. Here's the moon. Oh, that's the quarter speed. And you can see the ISS flying across. Now it's going to hop over to, let's go to this one. Sun, boom, flies right across. And then here's the moon again. Let me run that. Chris put enough effort into that. Let's run that one more time. This first one again is 1 second, and it hauls. Boom, right across. And then here it is coming across the moon. I've yet to be fortunate enough to try to do something like that yet, but that's always cool to see them. There's the stopped version of it coming through the moon. Direction of travel from lower left to middle right. And here it's a question of frame rate. I don't know what his frame rate was on the Canon 60D, but it was pretty good to get to get the station to stop there. Okay. COVID. We're still in the middle of Delta, and Delta is coming down. At least it is at Methodist. We're now finally below 800 people. So we have to see where this is going to go. So I've got a couple of things about the fort coming up. At the fort, they'd like to see a minimum of 14, 15 people in attendance, and we need people to adhere to social distancing rules. Please wear your mask at all times. I think most of the time inside buildings, I believe THC is asking that masks stay in place. For the public star party, you're encouraged to present on a monitor if you have the capability of doing EAA, or you can make the choice of going visual. Again, Fort McCavitt is November 4th through 7th. You can see generally this is the first couple of slides from the primer, which is on the website. To come through San Antonio, up through Junction, and then come up here to the fort. I'll keep going past Kerrville Junction, and up you go to the fort. An absolutely gorgeous place to do observing. As I said, the primer is on the page. Ken has provided this from the THC. Volunteers, it is asked that volunteers be fully vaccinated at the time of the star party. If you're traveling with a buddy, I think this sounds familiar, like from El Dorado. Please travel with a buddy who can assure that you get home safely should you become ill while you're there. They do not ask you to attend the star party. Doesn't account for the people going, but attend the star party if over 65 with the usual set, not to demean them, but the usual set of risk factors. Ken is checking on requiring a mask use in all buildings. He's not sure if this is still a restriction. Just presume that it is. In other words, just take your mask and be ready to put it on. Whether or not they will supply hand sanitizer, you may want to bring your own. But we'll have to work out food at 12, anywhere from 14 to 15 people. I don't know. Ken could overrule me. I would not count on the Saturday gig that the Friends of the Fort provide. I would be prepared to do your own food for the entire stay. And with that, that's it from the fort. And see, I told you it wasn't a new planet as the guy's cleaning the scope. Back to you, Doug.
Okay, Doug, you have a go.
All right, David, thank you very much for that, and letting us know what's going on with Fort McCavitt and what's going on with the All Clubs meeting, which brings me to my next slide. Our next JSCS meeting will be on October 15th, and we are going to encourage everyone to attend the online, the virtual All Clubs meeting. We will not be having a JSCAS standalone meeting, but instead we'll all go and participate in the All Clubs meeting in October. So I think that's going to be a really good meeting, and it's kind of fun to do stuff with all the other astronomy clubs in the Houston area. Hope that you can attend, and hope to see you there. Thank you for attending tonight.